Okay, hello and welcome to the next episode of Let's Talk Brand, the first in Poland series of video interviews with world-class branding experts. And today I'm excited to interview global positioning guru and best-selling author Laura Ries. And Laura is a leading marketing strategist, best-selling author, and television personality as well. In 1994, Laura founded Ries Ries, a consulting firm with her father and partner, Al Ries, the legendary positioning pioneer. And together they consult with companies around the world on brand strategy. They have traveled to over 60 countries, from Chile to China and India to Indonesia, teaching the fundamental principles of marketing. With Al, Laura is the co-author of 5 books on branding that have been worldwide bestsellers. One of them is a visual hammer, which is also behind you.
That's right.
But this is the Polish translation. I'm not sure if you've ever seen this book in Polish.
Yeah, no, they've sent it to me. So
okay,
and
wonderful.
we've been to Poland. So
yes, as far as I know, you've been to Poland. When it was?
Yes, it was a couple of years ago now, but yeah, I think we've been twice now, and it's a lovely place. The people are great. It's been so fortunate actually to be able to travel to so many countries around the world and meet people, and we all bond on the philosophies of marketing, branding, and positioning, of course.
Wonderful. So, welcome to Poland once again, and actually welcome to the podcast, Laura.
Thanks so much. It's a pleasure to be here. I know we've corresponded a lot
Yes.
on email and such, and so nice to see you face to face and to meet your listeners as well.
Okay, so I have a couple of questions to you.
Yeah.
And I've read on your Twitter account that you like to say. This is exactly the sentence. We like to say that our books break the traditional conventions of marketing. And this is from your Twitter account. And the illustration showed 2 books. One of them is Visual Hammer, which is behind you, which I am having here. And the second one is Battle Cry. But actually, what do you mean by that? What are these traditional conventions you break?
Well, I mean, I think, it comes from the fundamental of where we started in terms of positioning itself. That was the first fundamental break, right? I mean, it was thought advertising and whatever a company needed to do to sell their products or services was to communicate out and tell people about all the good things that they were doing and they had and the benefits, right? And what the flip was on positioning and thinking about it was that it wasn't just looking at who you were and saying it. It was first looking inside the mind of the prospect, the end goal, if you will, and noticing that it's not easy to get in there. And what the idea and the end goal was to own a position, to find an open hole, if you will. If someone's occupied a position, no longer, is it really your opportunity to get it? Knocking someone out of a strongly held position in the mind is almost impossible. So, there's just many of the philosophies subsequently that we've talked about kind of do break those rules. I mean, the idea, that a visual can be a really substantial part of a marketing program, or that a slogan that rhymes or uses alliteration can really, drive an idea and make it more memorable, is not the conventional way, so to speak. Although people love to talk about slogans, but there's small things that you can do. And I think thinking about brands in a visual aspect, I think, visual hammer is really a tremendous idea, especially in combination with positioning. Positioning is all about owning a word, right? Owning a word. It's narrowing the focus so that you can, own a word in the mind, own a position. Hopefully, maybe you're the owner of the whole category because you've pioneered it. But the difficulty of words, we talk so much about words, is how do you drive those in? The best way to do it is with a visual hammer. So while Coca-Cola is the real thing, authenticity incredibly important, being the pioneer, right? The dominant as well leader in that category. But saying those words repeatedly can get old, actually. But using the iconic contour bottle that Coca-Cola has, that's what drives the idea, and they use that repeatedly, and you can actually use visuals much more often sometimes than you can those words. And so the visual also has the emotional attachment, because when you communicate things visually, they evoke emotion in a way, even when you say the same thing with a word, you just not. It's the difference between seeing the picture of a baby and seeing the word baby written out.
Okay. Actually, you've almost answered all of my questions.
I'm good that way. Well, we've got lots of things to talk about.
So, but the book Positioning, The Battle for Your Mind, turns 40 this year. Okay.
This year it's a big birthday.
Okay. So actually, this year, so actually the book was born when I was born. So I was born in the new era, in the era of positioning. But I asked your father, is there any concept that could revolutionize marketing or thinking about brand building? And he answered, positioning could revolutionize marketing. Most companies today don't believe or practice the principles of positioning. Even you told me in the press interview that the word positioning has become very famous, but the principles of positioning have not. Almost every company talks about positioning their products and services, but few companies actually follow the ideas contained in the book, Positioning, The Battle for Your Mind. So is positioning still essential after 40 years? Or if you could explain in a simpler words, what is positioning and what are the principles?
Sure. Yeah. I talked a little bit about it, but, positioning is that simple idea that, most companies are obsessed about, who they are, even competition. Most companies are also obsessed about being better, right? We're going to be better, and then we're going to tell people we're better, and then we're going to win. Well, that's not exactly true, because you've got one thing in the way, and that's the mind. And that's where you have one of the big ideas in positioning, is that reality doesn't matter. The reality of whether or not, your product is not bad to be better, right? But that's not essentially going to necessarily lead you to success, because that's reality. And what people deal with was perceptions. And that's because it has to do with the mind itself. And so it's the perception of your product or service that really matters. And how do you build that perception? Well, in many ways, it's by narrowing the focus to stand for something, to own an idea, a position in the mind. Many times, it is about pioneering a new category. If you think about, what did Tesla do? Well, they narrowed to only electric cars. They focus everything on electric cars. They make their cars look different. They have their dealerships and, central city locations. They don't have to be out on Automobile Row because there's no gasoline, and they can, do things in a very different way that enable them, because they were so focused. And as a result, they own that idea in the mind. They dominate the electric car market, even though all the major auto companies around the world have now jumped in. Tesla was first. They did it with their own brand. And of course, they did it as well with PR, another big, idea that we've also written about, the fall of advertising and the rise of PR. Because of course, it was not advertising that built the Tesla brand. It was Elon Musk and the PR surrounding this, concept of a new category, electric cars, as well as, there was the enemy. When you are focused, all the car companies, it's hard they're not going to poo-poo gas engines to sell their electric. I mean, it's hard hard when you're trying to sell both sides of the street, if you will. You have a much stronger position when you don't do that. And that's one of the fundamental things that most companies get wrong, because as you mentioned, everyone knows the word positioning, but they use it and they don't follow, as you say, the principles in the exact way the book was written. So they say, well, yeah, we have a positioning statement for our company, as we're making a wide variety of products and services in many markets at good quality at reasonable prices. Well, that's not something that's an ownable idea in the mind. Even though you might be doing that, that's not what positioning is about. Positioning is about owning a singular idea, one that people will remember and say back to you. So that is the big difference. Now, you do mention, so positioning has really been around almost 50 years, because the original articles were a series of articles that came out in Advertising Age in 1972, so closer to when I was born. And those articles came out, and that's what really started this big buzz about it. And there was, at the time, it was quite controversial, as a matter of fact, and many advertising people, poo-pooed it as, not realistic. They were all about, at the time, it was the rise of, creativity in advertising, the fact of being, entertaining and funny. And of course, getting attention is a big part of it. But unless you're also driving the idea of what your product or service is, what the position is, it doesn't do you much good. It makes the advertising agency famous when they win awards. And of course, one of the big ideas, interesting enough, about positioning is the idea that once you have a really good position, you shouldn't change it. Of advertising agencies, and many companies, they want a new campaign every year, right? They want something fresh and new. A new CMO, a chief marketing officer, comes in, first thing they do is they fire the agency, they redo the logo, they have a new ad campaign. That's not good. I mean, the best thing about, positioning is the consistency over, not just months, but years, but decades, or sometimes even a century. And so, for BMW, they've been the ultimate driving machine for decades. And that's what took a very small brand, actually, that was originally in motorcycles, and made them for several years the leading luxury car brand in the world, ahead of Mercedes-Benz, who got into, cheap cars, expensive cars. They watered down their brand, strengthening it, maintaining your position, and driving it. The repetition and consistency of that brand is what many companies miss, and they change it up way too often.
Okay, so actually, do we buy brands, or the other way? This is not the first thought. When I want to buy a safe car, of course, so I don't think about the brand.
That's right. Well, you make a very excellent point. And
after this first thought, after this first word in my mind.
No, well, that's a very good point, and we always make that in that case, and it's a perfect follow-up, I believe. So people really don't care about brands. I mean, this is coming from someone who spent their life.
They care about themselves, what I want to achieve, who I want to be.
Well, yes, but the truth is, they care about categories. Categories are what get people excited. It just so happens that the brand becomes shorthand for the category. And that makes a, much more emotional way to think about it. So, instead of thinking, well, hey, I want to be, environmentally cool, and I want to have a great car, an electric car, they think Tesla, right? That represents that entire category. And that's why, brands that aren't across multi-categories with one name, I mean, that's what weakens them over time. If you can stick to that category, but the other flip side of that is that your brand lives or dies based on the category. While the category can lead you to the greatest riches of the world, and you think about a brand like Kodak that many of us remember, right, into film photography, they were one of the most dominant brands in the world. You recognize that gold logo, at every tourist spot, would sell film and around the world. It was a huge moneymaker. But what happened? Did people fall out of love with Kodak? No, they didn't. They fell out of love with the category film photography. And because that brand was so strong, that couldn't translate. What did they do when they knew the world was changing? It was not a surprise to them, but they launched Kodak Digital Science. They had a Kodak, digital camera, digital products, digital printers. But nobody wants a Kodak digital camera. That doesn't make any sense. From the company, they were just moving into a new category, but they did it with the wrong name. And that's where, understanding the principles of positioning come into play. It wasn't, that they couldn't go into the new category, but a new category that was so diametrically different needed a new name. And it's amazing just that slight difference, how it changes in the mind of the consumer. Because you think about what Toyota did when they had Toyota, leading, reliable, affordable sedans, right? But they wanted to go upscale. There was a great, market in luxury cars. And, why not be a luxury car from Japan, which was actually seen as a, low cost maker at the time. But they did it not with a Toyota name. They realized that would have dragged it down. People would never pay, for that much money for a Toyota. So they called it a Lexus, and they had a separate dealership and separate advertising. And that distinguished it in the mind that people buy a Lexus in spite of the fact that, if they read the paper, they know that it's made by Toyota.
Okay. In the introduction to your book, Visual Hammer, your father, Al, expressed the belief that the theory of visual hammer has the chance to become another great concept. So if you could now explain, because as I understand, visuals are very important if you want to put the words to the mind of the prospect or to own the category. So what is visual hammer, and actually why do we need it?
Well, I mean, one of the introduction as well to the positioning book, talked about we live in an over-communicated society. And my gosh, that was back in the 70s and 80s, and we thought we were, over-communicated with too much advertising. Well, look at us now. Over communicated, bombarded. I mean, we have every technology to keep ads and marketing away from us. Cutting through the clutter has always been a big, big problem. And that's where, when positioning talks about the over communicated, the oversimplified message, that's why, you want to drive it down and narrow the focus to own a word. I mean, oversimplifying it to make it easy to, again, cut through the clutter, get to the person so they understand it immediately. Now, when you talk about, okay, well, that's, words, but how can we really cut through the clutter if people aren't even going to take the time to read? Well, that's where visuals come in, because actually reading takes longer. You've got to process it. You've got to look at it, read it, talk to the, you've got two brains, the right and the left. Here, where a visual drives right into the right side of the brain, where you have the big picture idea, the emotion idea. And so if you can have a visual that can, drive in the idea, not just be pretty, but communicate. And that's where there's simple things like having one color is better than multicolors. If you look at the original Apple logo, it was a rainbow of colors. And actually, stylistically, that is more attractive, but it's not more memorable. Now they have the white or light gray Apple, and that is much, much. I mean, look at those stores with the big shining white apple. I mean, that drives through, right? That makes an impression. And so, thinking about that. And in many cases, if you think about brand names are incredibly important, of course. And sometimes, you can combine those so that the brand name can be visualized. So you think about, we have a store here that competes with Walmart is called Target, and they use a big giant Target sign. So, in terms of street visibility, you can see that. And think about the golden arches of McDonald's. Where would they be without those? Again, street visibility when you talk about retail, but really, retail, but think about, your app, right, on your phone. I mean, now this is the driving down the street. What is going to be that visual? And can it, not only be attractive, but can it drive in some kind of idea? Now, and not necessarily. I mean, you think about brands like Red Hat, that again, it pioneered open source Linux type software, but they gave it a unique and different name that, not many people wear a Red Hat, but that's what made it unique and different. And of course, their logo went along with it and everything, their icons. That can be a great thing, as well as another one's Twitter, right? Again, it wasn't, just the name itself. First and foremost, it was the category. They narrowed the focus, 140 characters or less. Everyone said you can write as much as you want. Twitter said no. Many times the best thing you can do is say no. Say no to something. Say no to gas cars. Say no to closed software. You're the open software specialist. Say no to long blogs. You're the short blog. And of course, when you're short, you think then the bird and the tweets and all of that, verbiage goes along and together, and makes a terrific brand.
All right. Actually, I'm thinking now, because the idea of positioning came up when there was no social media.
No.
There was absolutely different media ecosystem, and the idea became very famous. How it happened?
Well,
now when we have a social media and we have our own websites and blogs, it seems it's much easier. But maybe not, because there's much more noise.
It is for sure a balance. I mean, certainly traditional medias of, the newspapers and magazines were much more influential, and people read, far fewer of them. So, being advertising age was just the Bible. I mean, everyone in the industry read that, every week. And, I still, read it online and in many places, but like you said, there's so many opportunities and things to read. It's hard to keep up with everything these days. But it is interesting though, because you think about, in terms of positioning, again, one of the biggest and most important things about a brand is not necessarily the advertising, but we all know at the end of the day, it's word of mouth. It's people talking to each other about a brand. I mean, when your friend tells you about a new product or service, well, that carries a lot of weight, right? And so, using PR as a way to kind of drive that's third-party endorsement, so that really all you want to do is drive word of mouth. So I think what's interesting today is that's where, again, positioning is all about that. And today, we do have the ability to social media to pump that up and it happens quicker. I think that's in general what we see, which took maybe longer before we had social media. Things can spread across the world in so much of a quicker way. The way, TikTok is a brand, spread across the world, and, teenagers everywhere. I mean, everyone's got, and again, what did they do different? I mean, instead of having videos go this way, they did videos this way. Who knew, because then your kid can hold it and just flick it up or side. I don't know. They flick differently. It's the different video. But short videos, TikTok, again, a name that was lent itself to that great visual initially, starting with the lip syncing, right? That's another thing. The brands have to have an get off the ground strategy. Well, it's taking flight. It's much like an airplane. It takes an airplane 110% of power to get off the runway, and you kind of rattle along till you get into flight. And so when you get a brand off the ground, it's got to be incredibly focused. Hopefully, you're pioneering a new category. You're being totally different. You've got the name right, the positioning, the PR, the visuals, and that gets you up. And we say say, to 30,000 feet. At 30,000 feet, the pilot's relaxed, it's on autopilot, and a little glitch, what might have, that's going to cause catastrophe if you're trying to get off the ground. But at 30,000 feet, you could drop a little or raise a little. And that's where, you see a brand like Amazon, believe me, or Microsoft or Facebook, they're at 30,000 feet. They can actually afford, and they are making, mistakes in some cases. But they can afford it because they are so strong and they're flying so high above most other brands, right? But as an entrepreneur, as a startup, you can't do that. You can't think that, I am Amazon today. Amazon at the very beginning did exactly what you should do. They totally narrowed the focus. It was online books, not only just online books, best-selling books at 30% off. It was a tightly focused idea. Today, they sell everything, but it didn't start that way.
Okay, so there's a lot of noise, all of this marketing hype. So how to stand out on this overcrowded market? Because I still see entrepreneurs losing its focus and actually focusing on pushing ads. And that's absolutely crazy for me. But I experience this very often when I work with companies, that they really like to focus on ads, and they really like to focus on learning how to use social media.
Yeah.
They forget about positioning, about being different, or being the company that is doing something opposite to the leader on the market. And actually, if you can give us some tips how to stand out.
Sure. Well, that's a very good point. I mean, most companies do kind of, they're always a benchmarking, right? They're following what other people do, and they see if they do this, we need to copy it, because if they were successful, we'll be successful. And as we know, that's not the case. I mean, they have a different reality, if you will, and a different brand. You can't just do what they're doing. But it's a good point, because especially as the internet was coming on, and the last decade or so with the rise of social media, there was an incredible focus on tactics, the tactics of how to use Google search and social media and online ads, and it was the tactics, and forgetting about the strategy. And it's really the strategy that drives the success of any tactics. But there was a big learning curve. I think we all experienced in everyday life with getting used to this, new medium called the internet. And so, there was a lot of time, and I believe, as you say, energy spent on these learning and understanding the tactics. But we can never forget that it's the strategy that determines your success. So if you're not driving the right message, it doesn't matter what you do with the tactics. And while you might get clicks, that's the way advertising was. You might entertain somebody. We always talked about, the Super Bowl is our big advertising event, and ads might get remembered and talked about, but many of those times people forgot what the product was selling. And the same way with social media. At the end of the day, if you're not driving sales, if you're not getting people to remember who you are, it becomes very difficult. But, if you have, a visual hammer that can kind of bring together your ideas to solidify, the color, the look, the repetition. One thing that the companies, and especially I think entrepreneurs have an issue with is it gets really boring. It gets really boring to say the same thing and have the same kind of look for year after year, because listen, it takes a while to build a brand. Why? It takes time to get into the mind. And so you have to have the patience to ride it out for 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years. It took Red Bull 10 years to reach $100 million. That's why Coke didn't jump into the energy market. They saw Red Bull, at 20, 30 million. That's way too small for them. Of course, they waited too long. The category today is Red Bull alone is over $8 billion globally as a brand. And, they dominate that category, but they had the patience to stick it in there. And that's actually a great thing. That's why entrepreneurs have an advantage, because the big companies don't have the patience. They wait too long. They follow it, and then they launch a Me Too product. So, Coca-Cola launched, KMX and Tab Energy and Full Throttle. Have you heard of any of those? No, of course not. They went nowhere. They've done that for years. There was Dr. Pepper. They launched Mr. Pibb. There was Snapple was a big brand. They launched Fruitopia. All of those total disasters. The big idea is to be first and to pioneer a new category. Now, that said, the big thing, if you haven't, is to do the opposite of what the leader did. So Red Bull was the leader. There was after their big success, there was 1 year that there was over 1,000 energy drinks launched, 1,000 new brands, and they all had the same look of Red Bull. They all claimed to taste better or have more energy. Who's the big number two? None of those. The big number two is the brand that did the opposite of Red Bull, and they came out with a 16-ounce can instead of the 8.4, 16 ounces, and they called it Monster. And they've got a claw visual hammer with the green monster-sized can, monster-sized energy. And today they're, neck and neck right behind Red Bull and growing globally by being different.
Okay, so we answer to prospect needs, but in a different way. So actually, we should more focus on competitors than on customers.
Yes, no, we do. We talk about that a lot, that many companies are, like you say, totally customer focused. You need to be successful, to use the idea of positioning. You have to be competitor focused. If you had no competitors, things would be great. Believe me, you'd have 100% of the market. So you've got to be competitor focused to understand exactly, where your competitor stands in the mind, where your opportunity is. Listen, people are obsessed with many times doing market research, and while it's fine to understand what currently a customer is thinking, it is terrible at predicting what they will do in the future. Nobody is good about knowing what they'll do. When given, you given the idea, you tell someone, well, would you buy a $50,000 car from this Toyota company you know and love, or $50,000 for a brand new car company called Lexus? Believe me, in the focus group, they'll tell you Toyota every time, but in the real world, it's Lexus that wins the day. So many times they're not good at understanding that. Again, is a monster-sized energy, is a larger can better? I don't know, maybe it's not. But the idea of that it was different and it offered you a difference between Red Bull and them was the big idea, and why they built a big brand and none of the others did.
Okay, but let's imagine the situation. There's a Red Bull who is the leader on the market. There's a Monster who is the opposite to the leader. And what next? If I'm not a leader and I can't be the opposite, so what can I do?
Well, now you got to think. You really got to think out loud, and so you got to think of, well, how about 5-hour energy shot? Right? I don't want to drink a whole thing with all those calories, so there was the little tiny 5-hour energy shot. There's plenty of opportunities. What's so great is that there's endless. We wrote a book called Origin of Brands, and it kind of connected the idea of Darwin and the origin of species to the origin of how brands come about. And there's always opportunity, just like there's always new species coming about. There's always ways to kind of mix things up and create a new category. It's sad, but there's also categories that die, right? Like root beer is not a big category, or orange soda, kind of faded when they used to be a big deal. So, but that does allow then new opportunities for new brands in creating new types of categories.
Okay, it's absolutely irrational that companies imitate each other. It's crazy. Absolutely, and I cannot understand this. I call it parroting. So
yeah,
so
well, it is very, very interesting, and it's also, what companies sadly forget is leadership is the most motivating thing you can have about a brand to drive sales, and many times, I don't know if they feel like it's boasting, or they don't think they're trying to talk about the products and the attributes, instead of, if you have a leadership claim, I mean, my golly, you need to be on the package. One big opportunity we had, and we saw, in yogurt, Greek yogurt became a new exciting category. Well, who's the leader in Greek yogurt in America? Chobani. It's got a lovely name, but it's from a Turkish immigrant. Which, if you know the history, that's, the Turks and the Greeks. But the leading Greek yogurt in Greece should have been a big winner. But they got two things going wrong for it. One, the name, Faye. I mean, maybe it sounds good in Greek, but English is well, in America, English, but around the world, English is the second language. It's got to sound right in English. Faye doesn't sound right. Second, they didn't proclaim and they didn't emphasize their Greek heritage and leadership. It was tiny on the package. They boasted, it said total, and it said, a big 2%. Now, here's the difference. Faye in Greece is a dominant leader. Everybody knows it's the leader. They don't have to put leadership on, right? It's not, it's like Coca-Cola saying we're number one, right? They don't need to do it. But when you're going into a new market where that leadership is going to give you enormous credibility, authenticity, PR, everything else, my golly, it better be the largest thing on the package. But today that brand is nowhere here compared to Chobani, which came in, strongly emphasizing that this is Greek yogurt. This is why it's better. And today, of course, they're the leader. What we saw, who did it right was Barilla, right? A leading brand of pasta in Italy came into America not too many years ago, and big on the package. Italy's number one pasta. Italy, of course, known for pasta. Now, the funny thing is, if you talk to any Italians and you ask them about Barilla, they're like, Barilla?
Really?
That's what they serve in schools, prisons, and hospitals. Now, volume-wise, it's the leader. But they might be a little bit snobby about their pasta in Italy, but that's okay. I mean, the leadership is such a strong driver. That, and when you can use it, you can come into a very saturated market like pasta and take over and become the dominant brand.
Okay, so I see this problem in Poland. The first problem is Polish companies are sometimes lazy. They do not want to go global. And the second problem is the names of Polish companies.
Yeah, that is very true. Well, that's a good point. Two things, right? You've said the big opportunity these days, and this is where positioning has changed in terms of the 21st century. In the 20th century, it was, about, building your brand within your country, becoming a regional leader, a national leader, a national brand. That was the 20th century, was all about that. Today in the 21st century, it is really about building, the big opportunity is to build a global brand. We're so globally connected. We, enjoy the same things. Everything is easier with transportation and shipping and all of these things. And, having, really English as the second language that people know, so we can share, the common, we're talking today, right? It's very easy. Many people learn that English is their second language. So the opportunity to first, hopefully, build your strength within your home country and then take that globally around the world. Now, many things have to happen for this to work. One, usually you have to be more focused than you are in your home country when you go global. You can't go global with everything. When Nokia was a classic company, they were into everything, right? But when they went global, it was not just everything. It was only the cell phone. And so they, for a time they dominated. When there were dumb phones, there were Nokia phones. One of the issues was they own that position in the mind, they weren't able to jump into smartphones. They needed a second brand name for their smartphone generation, right? So doing that. Now, the next and most important thing is you need a name that works on the global market. Nokia is a good example. It's not an English word, but it sounds right in English. It's easy to say, spell, and remember. Or IKEA works great in English, or Starbucks, or Barilla. Now, some languages, are easily, can go Corona, for example, from Mexico. Sounds great in English, but some countries have a real problem. Now, I hate to say it, but Poland is one of them. Very long, lots of syllables, lots of vowels and consonants. So is Russia, and believe me, the worst is China. Now, here's the thing. Sometimes your language is so different that you have the opportunity to do, what we like and recommend is you have two name strategy. So you can keep your long Polish name in Poland, but have then a global brand for the global market. And so that again, like Red Bull in Thailand was originally where the product was from. It was an Austrian entrepreneur that said, let me take this thing global. But in Thailand, it's Krating Dang or something like that. But they gave it that Red Bull as the global name. And of course, that works very much better than Krating Dang. So, doing that, I think, is an opportunity so that you can keep, your heritage, but then have that global brand because the language is so different. Now, if you had if you had Barilla in Italy, you couldn't have a global name. That the names are too close and the languages are too close. But in your case, and many, like where the characters in China are so different. But we talk to, Chinese, and we work a lot with Chinese companies. I mean, they have a big hindrance when it comes to language. They generally use what they call pinyin, which they have a way to translate their Chinese into, an American or English type of sounds. But it doesn't work very well. That's why you get Xiaomei. Xiome. I mean, that's just not going to work. It's very, very challenging. And so you make it so much more difficult for yourself versus giving a global name for the global market.
Okay. Actually, Laura, I think you have stories for hours.
We do. Yeah. Well, there's so much going on. I think there's, again, there's opportunity. Sometimes, the fact that everyone's not properly, applying the principles of positioning is an opportunity for you, for you to go ahead and take advantage by doing these things and following these principles to really hammer your competition, and to make great strides and to see, again, one of the biggest things we warn against is, and we see way too often, is the idea of line extension, is to putting one name on multiple things. Many times, when new categories arise, you say, oh, well, like, we're Kodak, we're Nokia. Why can't we're the leader. Why wouldn't we make a smartphone with our name? Well, because, your name stands for one thing. And if you want to stand for something different, you need a different name. The idea in the 21st century that it's going to be companies that have multiple brands that will dominate. You see, Procter and Gamble, it's multiple brands. Even Apple, is each brand for each category. Some sound similar, but you've got iPad for the the tablet. You've got iPhone for the smartphone. You've got Macintosh for the computer. These are all different names. You really don't buy an Apple. Apple is the company, not the product, and it's different. It's different names for each category, which is the strategy all companies should use.
Okay, so this is wonderful end of our conversation, and thank you, Laura, for sharing your knowledge with Polish entrepreneurs students, marketers as well. It was really a pleasure to have you here. And if you would like to invite people to your channels, so let's do this.
Yeah, sure.
Where can we follow you?
That's right. Well, I'm on all the major platforms. The easiest way to find all those connections, though, is just go to ries.com, and it's RIES.com. And you can follow, I'm on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook and all those places. And it has been such a pleasure, part of this job, and the excitement is to meet marketers from around the world and countries, and to see, how they're doing. And we love to see success and people using these principles. And it is really a joy to see how the books and ideas have gone global as a global brand. And so that's been, so much fun. I'm looking forward to getting back out there and traveling. I've had my first vaccine, so I get the next one in a few weeks, and we'll be back out there on the road and being able to see people face to face.
Okay, Laura, thank you so much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Bye. Have a great day. Bye.
Bye.